Hey, I'm Fristelian, and I'm back. It's been so long since I was on YouTube, the next expansion is but a few weeks away. It would be nice to have had a grand reason to stop, but really, just a bunch of things went wrong and I dropped WoW pretty soon after launch. Of course, I didn't think I was going to quit, because I had done the sensible thing of capping out tokens and putting all of them into game time, so my sub didn't actually expire until a few months ago. Anyhow, I've been kicking about in alpha for a couple of weeks and thought I'd make a video looking at Frosty Caves. Of course, pre-patch will be out in a matter of days, so you'll be embracing this new reality very shortly. Lucky you. As it will invariably be changed at launch, there is little point checking the maths for anything. All I can really do is go through the logic, and since we still have the killing machine system giving crits by using crit, we are in familiar territory when it comes to enthusiasm for logical rigour. So let's just dive straight in. Core build wise, not a lot has changed. The same old faces are here. Pillar lasts 15 seconds but now has a 45-second cooldown and increases strength by your actions over the duration. Empowering weapon was changed from returning all runes to increasing haste for 20 seconds and giving a rune on use then every 5 seconds. There's a couple of legendary things and talents, but overall your core toolset is very narrow. So let's start blitzing through talents. Tier 56, Icy Talons is the standard auto attack increase, nothing to see here. Cold Heart comes from the legendary, so it takes 40 seconds to fully charge and costs a rune to use. You want to get the most stacks out of it per rune during pillar and other buffs. You could probably work out a complicated way to maximize it, but the lazy route is just to overcap into pillar, dropping a use every 7 minutes-ish. Inexorable Assault is the same but different. It also stacks damage up to 40 seconds, but works on a charge system tied to Obliteration Scythe instead of your auto attack. It's also tied to melee range, so Scythe won't always trigger it. Not that that matters, because it only hits your target once, and Scythe doesn't get that damage across everything. 57 contains the usual. Runic Attenuation gives runic power and a proc per minute lifestyle instead of every swing. Just because it's PPM doesn't automatically mean it's generating less power than before, but it probably will. Murderous Efficiency has a 50% chance to return a rune on killing machine, so there's no change there, and unfortunately Horn of Winter doesn't seem very useful still, given that it takes a global to use and delivers very little. 58 is the first line of utility. Death's Reach is for leveling in Mythic Plus, as it resets grip every time you kill something, giving XP. Asphyxiate is now available across all specs, because who doesn't like having PvP talents in the PvE tree? And Blinding Sleet is still here, but is only useful as long as the damage required to break it holds. 60 is the first AoE tier. Avalanche adds some damage onto Rhyme, Scythe is the same as Legion, and Frozen Pulse has been reworded, but is just the same. The perk is being able to combine these with Gathering Storm, that's now further down the tree. 75 is the second utility tier. Permafrost gives a shield from auto attacks up to 20% of your health. Wraithwalk is still 70% movement, but now doesn't replace Death's Advance, giving you 2 mobility cooldowns, if you can call them that. A crossover is Death Pact, that conveniently heals you before absorbing damage. Tier 90 is a variation on AoE. First is Gathering Storm, which I have to assume still puts Remorseless Winter onto a single target, and therefore would be your de facto choice. Glacial Advance is now on runic power, which is great, as that's an AoE Frost Strike, but it has a cooldown which is bad. Frostworm's Fury is from the Legion weapon, and throws a dragon every 3 minutes. It was recently renamed, I assume to clear up the confusion of having two things called Syndragosa, which was really needed in a spec that constantly iterates the word frost. Sadly, I find this genuinely irritating as a talent. If you liked the class flavour of calling upon the patron saint of Frosty Caves, why make it directly compete with Storm? Unless you're planning on being a complete cheeseball, there's not really a use for it. Lastly, tier 100, we have Ice Cap, where crits from Frost Strike, Scythe and Obliterate reduce the cooldown on Pillar. The only other cooldown you have to go with Pillar is Gathering Storm, so it's boring and entirely dependent on Storm damage. Obliteration has been changed. Spending runic power or Howling Blast gives Killing Machine, and now only has a chance to refund a rune, so it's much less consistent, to put it nicely. You might think that when using Frost Strike you're combining runic empowerment with the 40% chance to return a rune, but you forgot you're playing a Frost DK. It doesn't return 2 runes or appear to stack, so you will inevitably find yourself shit out of resources most of the time. The only saving grace is that Obliteration is bundled onto Pillar with its 45-second cooldown, and still lasts the full 15, So please don't think negatively of the pruning, because when it was on the global cooldown, it was complete ass to use. And then here comes Breath of Sindragosa, still limping along. Costs nothing to trigger and 15 power to maintain, so with a little prep you get whatever duration Runic Empowerment wants to give you. The moment they removed self-immolation in Warlords, they killed all of my interest, and by now I'm wondering why it still has a resource channel. It's not for gameplay reasons. I mean, just use the Bonestorm model and call it a day. The redeeming features are that it's not on the global cooldown and lines up with Empower Weapon. The last thing to talk about in talents is War Mode. It's the thing that switches your world from PvE to PvP, and you really should be playing in War Mode, at least to start with. Even if you hate PvP, the zones are split up, so you shouldn't see anyone from the other faction for several levels. Not only do you get increased experience, you get increased rewards from world quests, and because these are always active, you're just taking PvP buffs for general use in PvE. So in any spec, you take Necrotic Aura. It's an 8% increase to frost damage. I take Relentless rather than Medallion because mobs frequently use short CC. As for the others, unfortunately Death Chill doesn't trigger Cold Heart, so it's really up to you. Personally, I don't like overpowered rune weapon for questing because you only use it for bigger things and then you want the full 20 seconds, so I use Frozen Center and Tundra Stalker. Right, so now that we have rather brusquely gone through everything, where are the synergies? Well, Ice Cap makes Pillar hit roughly every other Gathering Storm, and is then of course completely wasted when they don't line up, so good job there. As for Obliteration, in 90, Glacial Advance does give procs, but there's so much synergy with Storm, why take anything else? 56, I'd expect Icy Talons or Assault, because Cold Heart has no interaction and costs are global. Murderous Efficiency is the only thing in 57 because you're rolling killing machines, but even that is not enough to consistently obliterate. So it leaves us with 60. In a perfect world, Avalanche would give you the highest damage during this window because of the increased times you're casting Obliterate, getting more rhyme. As I've said, getting runes back is totally random, so invariably you're on out. Because of this, it works okay with Scythe. Of course you don't want to use Scythe, but it saves you from staring blankly at your screen. It also turns Pillar into a decent AoE spike, which is handy for chewing through dungeons. Now if we were to look a little closer at things, naturally Pillar is being used off cooldown, so bank some runes and try to get Runic Empowerment on the back 3, which works while going into Obliteration with Frost Strike, as you won't have every rune back when you begin. We also have Storm and a short window to extend it. You would be forgiven for thinking that when dealing with cooldowns you simply put the longer one first. But, unsurprisingly, using either Storm or Obliteration means you have to spend time during the other doing something you don't want to. And since you don't have many casts to work with because you don't have any haste, so begins the oh so familiar clusterfuck. Historically, you would be able to use Hungering to fill runes mid-pillar, but not anymore. You have to use Empowering before pillar, not during. This and the whole point of Obliteration being to force Killing Machine, if you don't have a proc when pillar comes off cooldown, you'll be starting with Frost Strike, so leaving you with 3 globals as a block. So if you'd use Storm first, you aren't left with much time to work with. The solution, you'd think, is then to put Storm after Pillar but before Obliterate. However, the opportunity cost in Obliteration is so high you probably can't do that because it's what? The rune cost, so half an Obliterate crit, with the percentage of a rhyme plus avalanche and any Azerite modifiers, and then more importantly it's also the cost of the global to do it, which would be a Frost Strike or an Obliterate crit along with its rhyme and all that stuff. That's a lot just to break even. So unless it's actually overcoming these hurdles, you are using it before pillar and scraping up whatever you can. I mean, it's classic Frost DK. So it's quite possible you'll be forced into taking Glacial Advance or that damn dragon. But what's odd is that with current numbers I get from just hitting a dummy, you don't lose that many ticks of Storm using it first, which is irrational, and then the difference in total damage lost is a fraction of an Obliterate, so a seemingly small issue in the grand scheme of things. I mean, it's not like you're going to be doing this every 45 seconds or anything. Right, so conflict resolved, I guess. But now how do you work the pull? Knowing that weapon will return a rune before we even start means that the rune on Storm is coming back regardless. So the question becomes whether to Howling Blast on run-in or not. You'll be happy to know that this too unravels into a needlessly complicated situation. Okay, so here we go again. If you cast Howling Blast on Run-In, then along with Storm and Weapon, you now have enough runic power to open with Frost Strike immediately after Pillar, forcing Killing Machine on the first Obliterate. However, this first Obliterate must trigger Rime, or you don't have enough runic power to Frost Strike again, and so you end up having to rune cast Howling Blast just to get the next proc. You could use a regular Obliterate here instead, but if the second Obliterate isn't Killing Machined, it defeats the entire purpose of setting up the first one. The goal is still to maintain the maximum use of Obliteration, so given this, do you then skip the Howling Blast on Run-In and instead put it immediately after Pillar? As you will likely have to runecast one anyway, this both triggers the proc and solves the runic power problem. It appears to be the solution. However, you can't waste the run-in time doing nothing because you have several seconds to spend casting cooldowns, so this means you are immediately losing DPS by opening with Storm in the middle of nowhere because you only just started running towards the boss. And so my suggestion is to just ignore all of this bullshit and willfully do less damage for the sake of your own sanity. Start with Howling Blast as you run in, Storm, Empower Weapon, Pillar, Obliterate, regardless of Killing Machine, and then just carry on from there. It's super basic and probably what they wanted you to do in the first place, on the assumption their players wouldn't pay any attention to what they were doing. Right, so that's Obliteration. Let's talk about Breath. I will labour under the assumption that Gathering Storm is still used, but since there is no longer any conflict with Obliteration, we can safely put it inside Pillar. So that means we're finally free of, oh no wait, there's Rime. Rime doesn't provide any pseudo-runic power, so anytime you use Rime, you lose duration on Breath, and so begins the which deals more damage game, a tick of Breath or Rime. But that's easy, it should be Breath, else why is it even a cooldown? So you're thinking you drop Rime, but not completely because Breath doesn't return runes worth a damn. If you chain Obliterates, you run out pretty much instantly. At that point all that's left is to sit impotently watching your runic power drain away. So it becomes the familiar juggling game. You want to put the back 3 runes down quickly and keep limited to 2 active runes, at which point use Rime and fish for Killing Machine on the 2 runes left. The moment the 3rd rune gets refreshed, you hit Obliterate. This sounds exactly like normal mechanics because yes, there is actual downtime during Breath. It's amazing, I know. Starting the process mid-combat with full runic power gives the longest uptimes, but of course we don't start with any because how would that be helpful? So the goal is obvious, dump everything you can at the start. And this brings us back to our familiar lines of conflict. You can either do Howling Blast on Run-In, then 2 Obliterates, and then the cooldown chain, Weapon, Pillar, Storm, Breath, which will only net you about 13-ish seconds, or you can try and fish for Rime at the start and give yourself a little more rune recharge. So I've thought about how to really idiot-proof this. My solution is to open with 2 Obliterates, then Howling Blast, regardless of Rime. Because if you procced Rime, you can now do a 3rd Obliterate, using all the runes. But if you didn't, you have to cast Howling Blast anyway. And then you'd be doing the cooldown chain. This will consistently net you somewhere around 15 to 17 seconds with no effort or IQ required. In testing, the longest I've got so far is 22 seconds, and the shortest was 14, because yes, it's all RNG, isn't that fun? Unfortunately, this doesn't take into account run-in time. And incidentally, you can gain a couple more seconds by doing nothing after the initial Obliterates to get even more rune recharge, but then you're falling well outside potion. Of course, even I am not cynical enough to rule out the possibility of starting combat only to sit and wait for runes to recharge. So with all the minutiae out the way, talent synergies that maximise damage during Breath, anything that uses runic power is out, so goodbye Glacial Advance. You aren't using Rime properly, so Avalanche is gone. That leaves Frozen Pulse, which fits as you're sat on minimal runes the whole time. Icy Talons and Runic Attenuation should be staples. The only question left is whether Storm is worth it, but who really cares? Of course, everything I just said talent-wise is down to final tuning. You could be going with any old thing on live. And I suppose that's it then. Analysis over. I think I went about as detailed as I could, but the difficulty curve is more or less flat. Am I surprised that there were still flaws in the same shit after all these years? Of course not. That would be madness. What I've taken away from the game in general is that it matters less which talents you take, and more that you're standing in melee range with bonus points for facing the boss. I suppose the final question is, would I recommend Frost to you, one of the handful of discerning viewers who sat through this whole video to the end? No, I do not. Unholy has a better toolset and more options for basically everything, and whilst it isn't very dynamic and bits of it don't really work, it does make sense for the most part, which has to count for something. So, yep, that's it. Here endeth the lesson. I guess I'll do a quick roundup on me. Am I back on YouTube? Yes, very definitely. Without randomly disappearing in the near future, I hope. Content frequency will vary, but shouldn't be weeks apart. Am I back in WoW? Yes, for the next couple of months. My health has never been great, but I don't have the energy to raid Mythic. My plan is to level some things, probably a DK, Demon Hunter, Warrior and Hunter, and do the casual life, you know, Mythic Plus, check out whatever the heroic raid is, and then just tier tourism. Although I'm not quite sure how I can convert all that into something interesting for YouTube. After that, as much as I still love WoW, which for all I've said I still do, there are many more games in the world, and I see a future in many genres. But we'll see how we go. Hi, and bye.